Today was day 13 in Karen Reed's retrial. And again, we had one witness for the entire day, Yuri Buchanek, the supervisor of former trooper Michael Proctor. So he was on the stand today entirely under cross-examination, and he's not even done yet. The cross-examination of Yuri Buchanek is going to continue on Monday, but court is not starting till 10 o'clock in the morning. We're not starting at 9 o'clock, so you get to sleep in an extra hour on Monday, but then after that, you got to join us right back here, Brother Counsel Studios, at 10 a.m. for the live stream of day 14 of the Karen Reed's retrial, continuing with Yuri Buchanek on the stand. So, before we jump into the recap, I also want to make one other mention, and that is that this coming up Sunday, on Mother's Day, a very special day, we are going to be having a very special stream. Hopefully, we're going to have national trial lawyer Solomon Radner joining us at 11 o'clock in the morning Eastern time this Sunday, this Mother's Day, and hopefully I'm working on getting another very special guest in honor of Mother's Day to join us also for at least a little bit of time. I may need to sharpen up my persuasive techniques, but I'm going to be working on that over the weekend, so hopefully we'll have that special guest as well. So definitely tune in with us Sunday morning at 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern for that stream, and then again Monday morning when the trial picks up. So let's jump into the recap of what happened today. So remember, where we kind of left off is that Alan Jackson is trying to show and establish that this investigation was not done properly. They zeroed in on Karen Reed. They came up with this theory that she hit him with the car, and they refused to investigate other suspects in this case, which would include everybody in the house, and that they just took everyone in the house's words as gospel. And they just treated it as true and that no one's lying. And they didn't even think that maybe someone in the house is actually not saying the truth, and maybe they should actually search the house. So that was also kind of what he's trying to establish here, how they did not take other suspects into account. And this is what led to the following back and forth, the following give and take with the cross-examination. Now, before this, you should just understand, in case you're not following this every single day and every single minute of this trial, if you watch the cross-examination of Yuri Buchanek, it's really a masterpiece. It's a brutal cross-examination. The reason is that Buchanek really doesn't want to answer questions, and you see that so clearly. And when you do that as a witness, you're showing the jury that you have something to hide. You're trying to hide something. You're not being forthcoming, and you're refusing to answer even simple questions with a simple answer. And we keep seeing that play out in front of us, and Alan Jackson is masterful, showing how the witness is being evasive and showing how the witness is not answering questions and trying to get out of questions by not answering them. So you're seeing this play out, and I'm telling you, it's getting to the jury. They're seeing this, and it's making a very strong impression on the jury that this is a witness who's not being forthcoming, and they have possibly a lot of things to hide, which is not exactly what you want if you're Hank Brennan. So let me just show you this give and take, and this will give you kind of a little bit of an example of what type of back and forth we've been seeing the entire day. So here we go with the first one.
Of course, you make assumptions based on those suggestions, correct? Yes or no?
We have theories.
So here we go. He's saying, well, we have theories of the case, and therefore we build a case around some of our theories. Now listen to this.
Term for a theory is an assumption or presumption, correct?
I guess in some respect you can say that, okay. But I'm not.
Yes.
I'm not going to argue about semantics here.
Well, you'll agree that words matter, right? I mean, you're testifying, so words do matter.
Words do matter. That's important.
So, working off of your, as you put it, your theory, you theorized that there was an impact spot at 34th area, correct?
Based on the statement I hit him, I assumed that Mr. O'Keefe was impacted with something. Initial hours of the investigation, we had those statements I hit him. We had the statements that, oh my God, did I hit him? So utilizing that information with the evidence at that point that we had was a broken cocktail glass. So a theory would be, why is the cocktail glass broken? Because it came into contact with the victim. So that's why my information communicated to the ME's office was a possible domestic involving a glass strike to the victim. As a result, we had to go and see the victim's body and the injuries. So Mr. O'Keefe's injuries presented a certain way, and we learned more information. So the more information that comes in, the more information that we are able to corroborate statements and collect evidence that further corroborates other information is helpful in the investigation. That's how investigations develop. If we knew everything we knew from day one, there wouldn't be a process of developing investigation.
So remember, this is when he was saying that one of his first theories in this case was that John O'Keefe was hit with that glass. With the glass, he was hit in the face. And that was one of the theories that he was working on with this case, which means that there was some sort of altercation, some sort of physical altercation in this case. Well, maybe that happened inside 34 Fairview, right? So this was what he was working on yesterday. So he's getting this out from your Buchanan and then continue, and you'll see how he tries to be evasive at certain points also.
So the answer to my question, Sergeant, is you were working off of a theory, correct? Yes or no?
We were working off a report of an injured male party, and then we developed the information, collected the evidence, and developed the investigation.
Do you know what the word theory means?
I'm sorry, English is like a third language for me. So if you can bring up the Webster's Dictionary, I can read it out.
You want me to pull up the Webster's Dictionary? You want to take a break real quick and pull up the Webster's Dictionary to define a word that you used in an answer about 40 seconds ago? We're working off of a theory, quote unquote. You said it, not me. You want me to go get a dictionary so we can figure out for the jurors what that word means?
Objection.
All right, sustained. Let's move on.
So you see, I mean, this is just a little sampling of what goes on here. You know, he's the one that used theory. He's the one that used that word, and now Jackson's just asking him about it, and then he's saying, "Well, I don't really know what theory means." Well, you're the one that used the word, and then he says, "Well, you want to get me Webster's Dictionary?" It just doesn't work. It doesn't go well with the jury when you're trying to be this evasive. And this is really just a sampling of what's been going on the entire day and yesterday during cross-examination. So it really is most likely not making a great impression on the jury. Anyway, continuing. So he was talking about the certain pieces of taillight that he recovered. Again, remember, he went to 34 Fairview. This is your Buchanan. He went to 34 Fairview February 3rd, 4th, and 10th. Okay, so remember this happened January 29th, 2022. He went there February 3rd, 4th, and 10th, and that's when he discovered certain pieces of taillight. Now, one of the things that Alan Jackson asked him is that it would be nice to see the coordinates of where you found each piece of glass, right? So we know we have some pieces of glass in the street that was recovered by the CERT team. We also know that there's some pieces of glass that you recovered from the front lawn. And so it would be nice to map out exactly where each piece was so that we can figure out how this is possible for it to happen. Then we can reconstruct if this actually happened, this contact with the vehicle. And that's how this taillight broke. So it would be nice to know that. So he's asking, did you do any cross coordinates? And he said, no, he didn't do any cross coordinates. So there's just very close up pictures of the pieces of taillight, and that's it. So you don't see like a bird's eye view. You don't see a bigger view of where all the pieces of taillight ended up. And then you can start helping to help this investigation to put the pieces, pun intended, together. So that was one part. And then he said you didn't even take a picture of your cell phone. And then he said that you didn't really describe where you found each piece. Right? You didn't describe. You're just telling us that it's in the general vicinity of the flagpole and the fire hydrant. That's basically what you're saying. It's all in the general vicinity of a 50 square foot area. And that's the best that you can do. So first he tried to fight back on this also. And he said, well, no, the evidence bag will describe it. So what did Alan Jackson do? He pulled up the evidence bag and he says, okay, let's take a look at the evidence bag. And all the evidence bag says is that these pieces were recovered at 34 Fairview. So again, you're not getting anywhere with trying to fight him with this when you know that there's no clear description of where exactly these pieces were found. This is an example where you tell your witness, you coach your witness, and you say, look, these type of questions you just give in. You just say, yes, we don't have the exact coordinates of the pieces of taillight. That's it. And then you don't have to spend a half hour making you look like a liar and trying to like you're trying to hide stuff from the jury. Okay, but this is just again another example. Then when he pulled out the evidence bag, this was another area where he fought back on, which is going to come out, and there's no reason to fight it, but still he fought it. So he showed him the evidence bag, and it was filled out by Michael Proctor. So this is pieces of taillight that Buchanan found. It's in an evidence bag. He didn't fill out the evidence bag, even though it says his name on it, that he was the one who found it. It's filled out by Proctor. So he tried to say, well, I'm not sure if that was Michael Proctor who actually filled out the evidence bag. Well, who else would it be? I mean, really? Are you going to try to fight this? Like, come on, we all know that it was Michael Proctor. So again, he tried to fight back with this, and then he had to show him you don't know the handwriting of Michael Proctor. This is your subordinate. You've seen hundreds of reports from him. You haven't seen you can't recognize his handwriting. It's not like you're a supervisor of 100 different troopers. There's a small unit there. So okay, so that was another thing. Then he pointed out that there were certain pieces of evidence that were not booked into evidence until March 14th, 2022. This is undisputed. Hankburn is not going to dispute this. So this is another area where Buchanan could have said, yes, it was not booked into evidence until March 14th, 2022. Even though we recovered it on February 3rd, 4th, or 10th, you're right. It was not booked into evidence until March 14th. But then again, he fights back against this also. And that's another area where he's able to show that you're just fighting with me. You're just trying to be evasive, and the jury's realizing that. But again, eventually he made his point that it was not booked into evidence until March 14th, 2022. And then he showed certain pieces of taillight that were recovered by Mike Proctor. So Buchanan went to the scene 3rd, 4th, and 10th. Well, then Proctor went to the scene on the February 11th. And here's where it gets interesting, because on February 10th, Buchanan said that there was very little snow on the ground. So remember, we know January 29th was a big snowstorm. But then after that, it started to melt. And then there was rain, so that further helped the snow melt. And then by the time February 10th came, his testimony was that there was very little snow on the ground. That was his testimony. That was the extent of his testimony when he went there February 10th, and he recovered a number of different pieces of taillight, right? Okay. So then Proctor goes there the next day. The next day, February 11th, he goes and he finds, February 11th. And then he also goes back February 18th. Okay. So he goes back February 11th, February 18th, and look what he finds when he goes back. Look what Proctor finds when he goes back. So let's just pull it up here. Okay. That's one piece that he finds. And then look at the next piece. Let's get it to. Here's another piece. And then one other piece he finds. This piece. And you can tell these are 3 big pieces. And these are all in the general vicinity, like Buchanan testified, these are all in the general vicinity of the flagpole and the fire hydrant. And Buchanan, didn't find those 3 very big pieces, even though there's no snow on the ground. And it's all contained within the same 50 square foot area. And you searched it on February 10th. And yet, when Proctor goes there on February 11th, and the very next day, he collects big pieces. And then on February 18th, again, he finds big pieces. Some of those were on February 18th. But either way, he was trying to show out to Buchanan, you missed these pieces. So then what he tried to explain was that you're right that I said that there was a little amount of snow, but there could have still been snow there. There could have been some other mounds of snow, and maybe it was hiding under these other mounds of snow. So when I said again, and then he just looks like he's hiding. It looks like he's not saying the truth. It looks like he's not being truthful. So basically what you're asking the jury to believe is that when I said that there was very little amount of snow, I just meant in certain areas there's a very little amount of snow, but in other areas there's really much more snow. Like it's just great cross-examination, which Alan Jackson is pointing out. Okay, so then he moved on to the text messages, and this is where I think the defense made a very, very smart strategic plan here. This was a great strategy by the defense, and they made a great move. It was a great strategic move. What they did is that in last trial, you may remember, if you were following this from last trial, if you weren't, then I'm going to tell you right now what happened. In last trial, the Commonwealth was the one, Adam Lally was the one, the prosecutor, to introduce text messages between Brian Higgins and Karen Reed. Okay, now there's definitely flirtatious text messages, inappropriate text messages if you are in a long-term relationship with somebody else. Definitely no questions asked. But there was introduced by the Commonwealth and the prosecutor, and they were able to cherry pick certain text messages and from different days that they were texting, and it looks much worse when the prosecutor presents this as evidence to the jury, to the jury on the first time. So what the defense did here was I think brilliant. I think was very, very smart, is that they actually introduced these text messages through Buchanan. And they were the ones to bring these text messages out. And what they did is that they made him go from the beginning literally to the end. And you see the entire context of the text messages. And what you saw was the following. I'm not going to go through all the text messages. It was like an hour of reading of the text messages. But what you see is what I saw from this was the following. And this really changed my perspective. When I saw the first trial, I saw every single minute of the first trial. Okay. And now when I'm watching it again, I'm trying to keep an open mind for the second trial. I just see how this registers much differently this time than it did the first time. And that was the following. What you see from the text messages, the way I understand it, is that Karen Reed was not in a great place when she texted Brian Higgins the first time. And she definitely wanted to do something inappropriate with him. Okay. I think that's pretty clear from the text messages. You don't have to be a genius. So this is what was going on in the beginning. She got this idea in her mind for whatever reason. Maybe she's in a low state. She was upset at John O'Keefe because she thought that he cheated on her on New Year's Eve, and the relationship's not in a great place, and the kids are wearing out the relationship, and yeah, all the different reasons that she may have acted this way. Okay, but she did. And you definitely see that flirtation, the flirtatious text coming out, and she's saying that you're hot, and that she's interested in some sort of hookup, right? Let's just call it what it is. That's what it looks like. Then what happens is that as the days progress, you see that interest of Karen Reed wanes, and it becomes stale. And that's what you just see from these text messages. But it doesn't become that stale for Brian Higgins. It just doesn't. It seems like he's much more interested and still trying to keep the same level of flirtation up. And he's trying to get back into that area where she was before, in that, let's call it a moment of weakness. And she's basically done taking the bait. Now, there's still text messages back and forth, but you sense that her interest level really, really goes down. And in fact, there are certain days where she doesn't text him, and then he says something to the effect of, "Oh, you're ghosting me today," kind of showing hey, you're ghosting me. I'm your new interest here, and you're ghosting me. And yes, there are some text messages back and forth, but just when you see the text messages from the beginning till the end of their whole text messaging, it just sets a whole different tone, and it has a whole different picture to the jury about really what was going on. And what I took away from it was that, again, initially she absolutely wanted to do something inappropriate, maybe hook up with him and see where it goes, just have a good time, and then maybe that'll help her with her rage or anger, and maybe this is a way for her to get back at John O'Keefe, whatever was going through her mind. But it seems like after that initial 1 or 2 days or 3 days, she kind of got over it. Just looks like that, and it doesn't look like he got over it. So he still seems to be pursuing it. And he also admits certain things, like, I always thought you were hot, and I always had, you're just from the day one, and, things like that. And again, I'm not trying to excuse her at all in the way that this relationship started. It just seems that she got tired of it much faster than he did. And that's what you see. That's absolutely what you see. So if the defense is trying to prove this and trying to show that to the jury, that yes, maybe Karen Reed made some inappropriate texts, and there was a time where maybe she hooked up, but she just lost interest, and it became stale to her. That's what it seems like. And in fact, that's what led up to the January 23rd was the last text, and there was basically no more texting from her till January 29th. So if the prosecution is going to try to use these text messages to show that this is her trying to have an affair and trying to knock off her boyfriend, John O'Keefe, it's not going to work. It's really not going to work at this point. And you don't see that at all. You don't get that feeling at all from the text messages. And I think that this was actually again, a great strategy of the defense by presenting the text messages in the full context, showing everything. And then you kind of get this feeling that she was just basically done with it. And he was the last one to reach out to her, which again, she ignored until she actually texted him, John's dead. So that's what, that was what he showed the next part of this testimony. Now, again, and then here's another fight that Buchanan had, is where Alan Jackson said, you would agree that these text messages are flirtatious, right? And anyone who's watching this, the jury's watching this, yes, of course they're flirtatious. Yes, they're flirtatious. No question, right? But then he tries to fight back. Well, they're not all flirtatious. Some of them are not flirtatious. It gets tiresome, and it really gets tiresome to the jury also. And you just keep seeing it play over and over and over again. And this is another area where, again, he's just trying to be evasive here and say, well, it's not all flirtatious. Okay. Anyway, then, so he's trying to point out, he's trying to establish that there could be a motive on behalf of Brian Higgins, because you definitely see from him that he's still interested. He's still interested in this relationship. Okay. Anyway, so then he also said that he's not aware of any phone calls between Brian Higgins and Brian Albert in the early mornings of January 29, 2022. And this is that 227 phone call or 222 phone call in the morning, where there's some phone calls, which we're going to hear about, maybe our butt dials, from Brian Albert to Brian Higgins and Brian Higgins to Brian Albert. He also asked him if he heard about this 1:33 a.m. phone call that Brian Higgins made when he was at Canton Police Department that night after he left 34 Fairview. So he was asking him, after all this, after knowing all this information, would you have any suspicion that there's some sort of motive for Brian Higgins to kill John O'Keefe? Do you have any sort of idea in the investigation of this case that maybe here's a person who can be a possible suspect? You have somebody that looks like an altercation, which you thought initially. you got these text messages, and you got these phone calls to Brian Albert, and also the fact that he claims that he didn't notice a body coming out of 34 Fairview. And this was interesting because it seems that one of the things that Brian Higgins said was that he couldn't see the body because it was covered by a snowbank. It was covered by a snowbank. That's why he couldn't see that's why he couldn't see John O'Keefe's body when he left 34 Fairview after, according to the Commonwealth, his body's lying there on the front lawn. The problem with that is that it wasn't really snowing significantly at that point. There's only a dusting of snow. It's impossible that it would have been covered by a snowbank. So that also shows that this is a person, Brian Higgins, who does not seem to be so forthcoming and saying and being honest, and therefore it should be raise another red flag that maybe this is a suspect in this case. But no, you didn't investigate into that. And then he asked him about Brian Albert. What about Brian Albert? And he showed in the waterfall the play fighting and getting into boxing stances and the grappling, and then also shows the motioning for John O'Keefe to come with them and follow them. Okay, and then also he established that they're former military, both Brian Albert and Brian Higgins, and they're former police, and they have hand-to-hand combat training and all that. Okay, then again, this is another area where he tried to fight back on, and again, it just boggles the mind how he tries to fight on every single issue. So this was another issue where he showed him the ring video at One Meadows. So the ring video, you'll remember that this is when Karen Reed was leaving John O'Keefe's house at like 5 o'clock in the morning. And she was backing up. So this is before the police got to the car, before anything. So she's backing out of the car, backing out of his house, One Meadows. And you see, and they blow up a picture of the video of John O'Keefe's car, which Karen Reed backs into, and she nudges it. So she nudges the Chevy Traverse. That is John's car, and she's backing out, and she nudges the car a little bit. It does nudge a little bit. Now, if you want to make the argument that little nudge cannot crack a taillight, fine. But to completely try to say that never happened, and there was some disputing about this point from Brian Higgins, and again, it just doesn't look good to the jury. Then we got into Chloe. So he talked about Chloe and the fact that they got rid of their dog, Chloe. Now this is again another area where he's trying to fight the semantics here, and he's saying, well, I wouldn't say that they got rid of the dog. You know, they maybe rehomed the dog. Maybe they put it up for adoption. So then again, he gets back to this point. Okay, they got rid of the dog. Okay, one way or the other, they got rid of the dog, right? Okay. So then he finally got him to concede on that point. And then listen to this, because this is really brand new information in this case. So listen to this information about Chloe, the dog, and what happened with Chloe. Because it got rehomed, we know, but what happened after it got rehomed? So listen to this. So let's get there for a second. Give me a minute. Okay.
I did not get any veterinary records from the Albert family.
The veterinary records that you did get were veterinary records that had been utilized with the Albert.
So he's trying to track down Chloe. Right? He's trying to track down what happened to Chloe. Where is Chloe? Where is she? Who owns her? You know, so that's what he's purporting to do here. So now listen to this.
Name? Where these veterinary records?
The veterinary records were with the vet that's caring for the dog and also owns the dog now.
Okay.
So you have a veterinarian now who owns Chloe now. The veterinarian is caring for Chloe, and now the veterinarian owns Chloe also.
And those records also had been dated prior to when the dog was owned by the Alberts.
Okay. So other than some veterinary records that, and by the way, the dog's not even named Chloe, correct?
The new owners renamed the dog, yes.
Cora?
That's correct.
And the new owners did not get that dog from Brian and Nicole Albert, did they?
No, they did not.
Okay, so there's a new name to the dog. It's not Chloe anymore. It's Cora. And now this new dog owner, who purportedly owns Chloe, changed the name of the dog. So it's Cora now. And she didn't even get this, the veterinarian. I don't know if it's a he or she, but this veterinarian did not get the dog from Brian and Nicole Albert. So where did this veterinarian get the dog from?
They got it from a separate person. Is that right?
That is correct.
Separate person named Riley?
That's her last name, yes.
So they got it from Riley. Now, where did Riley get it from?
And did this person Riley have any records showing purchase of Chloe or adoption of Chloe from the Elmers?
No.
So now, so Riley was the one who this dog was rehomed to, right? So Riley now has the dog. Now there's got to be some records of that, right? Well, there's no records of it. So this dog, who's reporting to be Chloe, was rehomed by the Albert family to this person named Riley. There's no records of this at all. There's no adoption records. There's no purchase records. There's no transfer records, nothing. And then another separate move that Riley goes and give this dog to a veterinarian. And now the veterinarian owns the dog and is taking care of the dog. So that is the story with Chloe now. Okay. Telling you, this case has so many interesting parts that. All right. So that's probably an understatement. So moving on, then he moved on and he said, okay, would you agree with me that timely reporting is important? You know, for a police officer to write a report as early as possible as to when the event is happening. Wouldn't you agree with me that that's important? And again, he tried to fight back on this point. Like these are softballs. Yes, of course. It's important to write your reports as timely as possible. Of course, and things happen, and sometimes emergencies happen. You can't always write the report right away. But to fight up against this and say, no, it's not so important. It's really not so important, to write reports on time. And then he brought out the following. He said that 20 reports in this case were not written until over 100 days after the event. Then he said 11 reports in this case were written more than 300 days from the time of the event. 3 reports in this case were more than 400 days from the time of the event. 4 reports was more than 500 days from the time of the event. And the longest delay was 581 days until a report was written. That looks a little bit that doesn't look like such great police work, right? When you have that long of a delay before you write your report. Then he got into the interview of Ricky D'Antano and Heather Maxim. Ricky D'Antano and Heather Maxim were actually behind Karen Reed's vehicle at 34 Fairview. Pretty important witnesses, you would think, right? However, they were not interviewed until September 2nd, 2023. Now, the excuse for this was, from Buchanan, is that, we spoke to somebody else in the car, presumably Ryan Nagel, and he told us that everybody else in the car has the same recollection. And nobody else in the car went in the house. So is it really so important to interview Ricky D'Antano and Heather Maxim, who happened to be in the car also, if Ryan Nagel's already telling us the story of what happened? And the jury is probably sitting there thinking, of course you have to interview those people also. You want to see if their stories actually corroborate. Maybe someone's not saying the truth, right? I mean, that's what a police investigation is. You try to interview all the witnesses. You don't just say, well, all 5 of you were in the same room, so I'm only going to interview one of you and assume that all of you saw the same thing anyway. So what do I have to do all the witness interviews? Of course not. That's of course not what you do. But still, that was the excuse that Buchanan gave why they didn't interview Ricky D'Antano and Heather Maxim until September 2nd of 2023, about a year and a half after this incident with John O'Keefe ending up dead. Okay, and then also he pointed out another part of where he was saying that Ricky D'Antano in the interview said that Karen Reed was parked behind the car. He didn't say that they pulled up actually simultaneously. And this time he tried to say that they pulled up simultaneously. And he thought maybe that, he made some suggestions that maybe he violated the court order, the sequestration order by watching some of the testimony. Okay, so that was just a little bit interesting. But Alan Jackson is just making some great points on this cross-examination. And it's really getting tiresome, I'm sure, that the jury where Buchanan's really, really fighting on every single little issue of this case. So that's what we had today. That was the extent of the cross-examination today, and we're going to pick it up again on Monday. So again, to remind you, we got Sunday, very special Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to all of you mothers out there. So join us Sunday at 11 o'clock Eastern for that live stream with one special guest and hopefully 2 special guests. And then we'll see you back here on Monday morning at 10 a.m. Remember, 10 a.m. for the continuation of Karen Reed's trial. Everybody have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.